What up? This is Matt with Gear Zombie, and today we're going to talk about how to start your podcast. So, it's a new year and you've decided that you want to launch a podcast. The podcast world is still growing as fast as ever, and whether or not you're trying to launch one just for your own entertainment or a hobby, or whether you're trying to help your business along, podcasting is currently one of the world's greatest forms of communication. Podcasting gives you the ability to touch ears all around the world. People used to be restricted to consuming their content pretty much from terrestrial radio. Now they're able to grab these devices, put whatever they want to hear on their phones, and listen at their desk, at the gym, in the car, wherever they want. They can consume everything a la carte. And the great thing, or sometimes not so great thing, is it gives everybody the ability to create content. The cost of entry is low and the potential is unlimited. So today we're going to discuss some of what I think are key things you need to consider when getting ready to launch your podcast. But before we do that, if you would do me a favor, hit like, hit subscribe, hit the little bell icon. It really helps out my channel and I would love to see you back. Okay, first thing, determine what type of podcast you want to do. Now, in my opinion, there are really two different types of podcasters. There are the hobbyists, the people that want to sit around with their friends and BS about random topics or whatever. They just want to have a good time. And then there are people that have a more pointed vision for their podcast. Maybe they're doing it to supplement a YouTube channel or their business, but they have more of a razor focus on what they're trying to do. Now, some of the steps are going to be the same no matter which direction you're going, but the person that is more focused is going to have to take more consideration into what they're doing beforehand so they don't have to fix things afterwards. Like most things, if you get off on the right foot in the beginning, it's going to save you a lot of headache in the end. So first thing with determining your type of podcast is what sort of genre do you want to be in? One of the most common types of podcasts to do is the just sitting around with your friends and BSing about current events. And that's also one of the most difficult podcasts to get listener traction with because it is so scattered. Podcasts kind of share the same sort of theory as YouTube. The more zeroed in your genre, the easier it is for you to appeal to a certain group. If you think about what's really hot right now, you have your murder mystery podcasts, you have your technical podcasts, people talking about various TV shows, and each one of those specific categories gives the listener more of a reason to reach out and try your podcast. Okay, you've got your genre. Now we're going to pick a podcast name. Now, the one thing I'm going to tell you about your podcast name is that this is more important to you than it is to the listener. To them, it's just a placeholder. Sure, a catchy name is great, but a lot of times podcast names aren't even relevant to the type of content that they're producing. But of course, this is something that's important to get right because once you've picked it, you're going to want to stick with it. While you're searching for your podcast name, you're going to want to make sure that all the social media accounts are available. You're also going to want to make sure that the domain name is available. You want to do the best you can to make sure that it is all the same name. Because if you approach your podcast like a brand, being able to just say your name and have somebody just Google the name and come up with everything is super valuable. Okay, we've got the genre, we've got the podcast name. Next, we're going to go to artwork. Artwork portion of this always makes me cringe because I am terrible at it, but it's something you're going to have. You're going to need artwork for all of your social media accounts. You're going to need thumbnails for your podcast. You can either do it yourself with free utilities, or you can pay somebody to do it. In my experience, probably the best and cheapest way to go about it is Fiverr. Now, I have no affiliation with Fiverr, but I've used it for a few different things, and most of it with a fair amount of success. I love having the ability to pick tons of different people for different projects, especially for quick little things like artwork. What you don't want to do is just grab a picture from somewhere and use that. And you don't want to do that because you don't want the copyright police to smack you down on your new podcast. If that's what you want to do, make sure you're searching for royalty-free or Creative Commons images. Okay, so we've determined the type of podcast, we've picked a podcast name, we've got our artwork handled. The next thing we're going to do is start to think about how frequently we want to put a show together. Podcasts are no different than any other type of content creation. The frequency that you post is going to help bring in more consumers. If you can stick to a schedule and if you can let your audience know what that schedule is going to be, that is a huge best practice. Next up, your gear. Okay, there's a whole bunch of different theories with gear, and it kind of goes two completely separate directions. There is what I call the Gary V or Gary Vaynerchuk theory, and then there is the other way. The Gary V way is it doesn't so much matter the production value, just put out content. So let's say you're just an audio podcast. The number one thing that's going to make people shut that off faster than anything else is having poopy sound quality. Before I recorded this video, I went out to see what a bunch of other YouTubers were saying about podcasting. And the amount of them that said to just take your phone, set it in the middle of the table, put everybody around it, and record your podcast was almost an embarrassing amount. You can use your phone. There are microphone attachments that you can get for your phone. Even without the microphone attachment, this will work fine just for recording yourself for a podcast, provided you do some simple things like don't wave your phone around, keep it isolated, talk into your phone, much like I'm talking into my podcast mic here. That being said, if you're going to have multiple people on your podcast, do yourself a favor and spend the little bit of money it would take to just have multiple microphones. It doesn't have to be expensive, and it will tenfold improve the quality of your podcast. Okay, now you've got your gear, you've got your plan, you've got your name, put everything all together and record something. It doesn't matter if you're doing this by yourself or you're doing it with other people. You're gonna wanna take some time to sit down and get acquainted with your gear. And if you've never done it before, you're gonna wanna take some time just being in front of the mic and learning how to present your content. For a lot of people, it can be really difficult to not sound like a 90s infomercial presenter or the radio DJ guy. People respond better to when you can just be yourself and just talk naturally. But after you get things recorded, then you have some decisions to make. Do I edit my content or do I just send it out to the world untouched? I am a huge fan of editing your content. Whether you're by yourself or you're with other people, there's a huge potential for dead spaces or things that you just don't want. Throwing your audio into an editor, cutting out dead spaces, will make the experience a lot easier on the listener. It'll also give you the opportunity to change your sound quality if you want. Maybe apply some compression or EQ to the vocals. And there's a lot of ways you can do that, whether you're using something as simple as GarageBand on Mac, or you're using a digital audio workstation like Cakewalk by BandLab or Reaper. Using something like that will give you total control of the product. Also, during this time, I try to figure out how long I want my podcast to be. I generally try to go no longer than an hour for audio and no less than a half hour. I don't think there's any real science on that, as you can find plenty of people that will listen to 3-4 hour long podcasts. But find out what's going to work for you and your genre and try to stick to that. Next up is picking your hosting, and I'm probably going to tell you different than 95% of the people on YouTube. Almost every video that I watched would run down a list of various podcast hosting companies. Those are fine. A lot of them do a great job. In my opinion, the best way to host your podcast is to do it yourself. If you went through when you got your name and you bought your domain name, you can also buy yourself some web hosting. If you use something like GoDaddy or Bluehost or whatever, all of them will have an inexpensive hosting option. And that inexpensive hosting option will give you a free option to turn on WordPress. Once you turn on WordPress, there's various plugins you can use to host your podcast, and then you are hosting everything all by yourself. You have everything all right there in total control of it. Pretty much every hosting company that I have seen has some sort of caveat, being you can only upload so many episodes, so much size, you can only have so much transfer bandwidth. There's all kinds of fine print and a million different things. And most of them, to get off the blocks, you're going to end up paying some sort of fee. In my opinion, that money is better spent on web hosting and you controlling all of your content than putting all of your eggs in the podcast hosting basket. There are some podcast hosts that will offer some benefits, but most of the optional benefits are things that you could handle on your own. And really, setting up a WordPress page is not that hard. There's tons and tons of tutorials on it. And not only that, it gives you the ability to blog and have everything under one roof. Once you're set up and you have everything set up with iTunes, if you wanted to bolt on to some other service, that's almost always an option. Going the other way, moving your content to a host and then trying to move it back to your own platform later can be a huge pain. After all that's done, it's time to upload, launch it, and promote it. Promoting is pretty easy. You're gonna blast it out on your social media. Never hurts to be an active part of Reddit in whatever genre that you're podcasting in. But one of the things that is super helpful to get listeners, and something that one of my podcast buddies does, is he listens to a lot of podcasts and he makes friends with a lot of podcasts. He'll do that through social media engagement and then ends up trading shout outs with them. You'll find no shortage of people that will be willing to drop your name if you drop their name. And if you can build a relationship with those types of podcasts, cross promotion, even some collaboration can be a huge step into making your podcast grow. All right, hopefully you got a couple little nuggets out of that. If you liked anything I had going on today, hit like, hit subscribe. Until next time, Gear Zombie.